Welcome to Threads of Truth, the podcast where real-life mysteries meet internet speculation. Today, I want you to really think about the people you interact with on a daily basis. You know, the people who basically just make up the background noise of your life.
Right. The background characters, like the ones you pass in the grocery store aisle without even a second glance, or, the person pumping gas at the island right next to yours.
Exactly. Because we are completely hardwired, from a sociological standpoint anyway, to look at those people and see safety. Or at the very least, just total normalcy.
We look for red flags.
Right. We look for erratic behavior or suspicious movements like overt threats. But what happens when the flag is painted the exact same color as the sky? Because today, we are going to explore the terrifying reality of a man who weaponized that exact illusion. His name was Israel Keyes.
And the illusion he built wasn't just convincing, it was structurally flawless. Like if you looked at his life on paper, you saw a United States Army veteran who served honorably from, I think, 1998 to 2001.
Yeah.
And after his service, he built this totally solid, reputable career as a skilled construction contractor. He eventually settled into this incredibly unremarkable, quiet life in Anchorage, Alaska.
He was just a dependable neighbor.
Exactly. A dependable neighbor, a devoted father to his young daughter. If you lived next door to this guy, there was absolutely no leak in his demeanor whatsoever to suggest anything was out of the ordinary.
But behind that painfully ordinary facade was a reality so dark and so calculated, it almost defies comprehension. I mean, Keyes wasn't a predator who acted on some sudden, uncontrollable rage in a dark alleyway.
No, not at all.
He was a man who treated murder like it was a long-term construction project. He successfully avoided detection for over a decade. And he didn't do it by getting lucky either.
Right, he mathematically engineered it.
He did. He engineered his life, his finances, his travel, all of it around the act of killing.
It requires a really profound level of cognitive dissonance for us to even, process that level of compartmentalization. I want you, the listener, to just imagine standing in line at a hardware store or maybe waiting for your order at a local coffee shop.
Yeah.
And you are completely unaware that the perfectly polite, ordinary-looking man standing right next to you has spent years meticulously plotting a random act of absolute violence. He doesn't look like a monster. He looks like a guy just, picking up some drywall screws.
It totally reminds me of how cybersecurity experts talk about certain types of malware. A loud computer virus is terrifying, the kind that locks your screen and demands crypto immediately.
Oh, yeah. Ransomware?
Exactly, ransomware.
Yeah.
But the ones that really keep experts up at night are the zero-day exploits, the ones that lack any recognizable signature. They don't announce themselves at all.
Just hide.
Right, they don't crash your system right away. They just run silently in the background of your everyday life, completely undetected by the antivirus software, just observing, collecting data, until it's time to execute. And that was Israel Keyes.
He was a human zero-day exploit.
He really was. And our mission today is to walk through the stack of sources we've gathered. The meticulously planned timeline of his movements across the country, the decentralized network of what he called kill kits that he buried, and of course, the chilling FBI interrogation tapes that finally brought his hidden reality into the light.
To really understand how a human zero-day operates, though, we have to look at his geographical footprint. Movement was really the central mechanism of his entire methodology.
Yeah, he never stayed put.
Right. So after leaving the Army in July 2001, he didn't settle down in some typical suburb or a bustling city where people are constantly, watching each other. He moved to Washington State, specifically to a really remote place called Neah Bay.
And let's paint a picture of Neah Bay for you, because it's not just a small town. It is incredibly isolated. It's located way out on the northwestern tip of the Olympic Peninsula. Like, you literally cannot go further northwest in the contiguous United States.
It is deeply secluded. He worked there for the Maka Indian tribe. And in his own words, during his later interrogations, Keyes described Neah Bay as boring town.
Boring is one word for it.
Yeah, but if we look at this through the lens of a developing predator, a boring, isolated town is the ultimate staging ground.
Right.
Provides a laboratory.
Oh, well, a laboratory.
Yeah, it's a place where he could hone his methods, test his boundaries, and establish his double life without the intense overlapping security cameras and, the high-tech scrutiny of a major metropolitan police force.
That makes total sense.
He lived in Washington for years, just solidifying this discipline before eventually relocating his business and his family up to Anchorage, Alaska in 2007. And for years, he followed a very specific set of internal rules to keep his crimes completely quarantined from his daily life.
Well, I think we really need to look at the exact moment that quarantine failed. Because if his absolute cardinal rule, the one thing that kept him off the radar of federal law enforcement for a whole decade, was never hunt in your own backyard, then February 1st, 2012 was the day the entire system collapsed.
It was a monumental deviation from his established pattern. Up until this night, he was practically a ghost. But on that freezing February evening, he targeted an 18-year-old barista named Samantha Koenig.
And he didn't fly across the country to do it this time.
No, he did it right there in Anchorage, at the Common Grounds coffee stand on Tudor Road. I mean, mere miles from where he lived and worked.
The logistics of this abduction are just harrowing. We really need to walk through how methodical this was, even when he was breaking his own rules. Because he didn't just, stumble upon this coffee stand on his way home.
Not at all. He systematically evaluated multiple coffee kiosks in the Anchorage area. He chose Common Grounds specifically because of its sightlines, its proximity to major roads, and its late operating hours.
And think about the environment for a second. It's February. In Alaska, the sun has been down for hours. It is freezing. It's isolating. And Samantha is working completely alone inside this tiny, confined box, just trying to close up the shop for the night.
And we really must emphasize that he had never met her. He had never even seen her before that night. This wasn't stalking in the traditional sense where the offender develops a fixation on a specific person.
Right. It wasn't personal.
Exactly. It was a completely random selection based entirely on logistical vulnerability. She was simply a target occupying a space that he had deemed tactically advantageous. So just prior to closing time, Keyes approaches the stand wearing a ski mask.
Yeah.
And he does something that is so chilling in its mundanity, he orders a coffee.
It's a psychological tactic, right? By engaging in a normal transactional behavior like ordering a drink, he forces her brain into a standard customer service script. It delays her panic response by just a few crucial seconds.
That's exactly it. She makes the coffee, she hands it to him, and that's the moment the mask comes off, metaphorically speaking, of course. He pulls out a gun and demands money.
And she complies.
She complies immediately. She hands over the cash from the register. But the cash was a total ruse. He forces his way inside the small kiosk. He pulls out zip ties and tightly binds her hands.
God, that's terrifying.
He then asks where her car is parked, intending to use her own vehicle for the abduction, but she tells him she doesn't have one. She walked to work or maybe got dropped off. So he is forced to pivot. He marches her out into the freezing night, walking her toward Tudor Road.
And here's where we see Samantha's incredible survival instinct. She doesn't just succumb to the terror. She actually fights.
She does. She breaks away from his grip and makes a run for it.
But the physical disparity is just too much. Keyes chases her down and cackles her to the frozen ground. He restrains her, pointing the gun directly at her. And he issues this very specific, incredibly chilling threat. He tells her that the gun is loaded with very quiet ammo and that she shouldn't do anything to make him kill her right there in the street.
And the phrase quiet ammo is such a calculated mechanism of control.
How so?
Well, it eliminates the victim's hope that a gunshot will draw attention and save them. He's telling her, even if I shoot you, no one will hear it. He then forces her across the street into a parking lot situated between an IHOP and a Dairy Queen. And this is where he had staged his vehicle, a white truck.
The preparation of this truck is a perfect window into how his mind worked. I mean, he didn't just drive his everyday work truck to a kidnapping. He had physically altered its appearance specifically for this event.
Right. He took the mounted toolboxes off.
Exactly. He took them off the bed of the truck to completely change its silhouette. If someone saw it drive by, they wouldn't describe a contractor's truck. They'd just describe a standard pickup. And, of course, he had completely removed the license plates. He forces her inside the cab and drives off into the Anchorage night.
During the drive, Keyes initiates a really complex psychological game. He tells Samantha that this is just a straightforward kidnapping for ransom.
Which was a lie.
Total lie. But Samantha, trying to reason with her captor, explains that her family doesn't have much money, that he isn't going to get the massive payout he's looking for. Keyes counters this by explaining they'll use the public's help to raise the money. He explicitly promises her that if she simply cooperates, she will be returned to her family completely unharmed.
And she is doing everything right in this situation.
Yep.
She is talking to him, trying to humanize herself, literally negotiating for her life. But then, Keyes hits a massive logistical roadblock in his own plan. To send a ransom text and establish the narrative he wants, he needs her cell phone.
Right, but she doesn't have it on her.
Exactly. She left it in the kiosk during the struggle. So what does he do? He drives back. With Samantha bound in the truck, he returns to the Common Grounds coffee stand, leaves her in the vehicle, walks back into the active crime scene, and retrieves her phone.
The sheer brazenness of that decision cannot be overstated. I mean, to return to the epicenter of an abduction you just committed, knowing the police could be pulling up at any second if a passerby had noticed the empty, unlocked kiosk, it's insane.
It really is.
Once he secures the phone, he drives to another part of town. He uses it to send 2 text messages, one to her boyfriend and one to the owner of the coffee stand. He meticulously crafts a narrative, texting in her voice, claiming she had a bad day and was leaving town for the weekend to just, clear her head.
Right.
Yeah. Then, to ensure the phone couldn't be tracked by cell towers, he completely removes the battery.
Okay, let me stop you there, because we hear this a lot in true crime. Oh, he turned off the phone. But pulling the physical battery is a distinctly different mechanism, isn't it? Like in 2012, were phones really tracking you even when powered down? Or was he just being paranoid?
It definitely wasn't paranoia. It was an acute understanding of cellular technology. When you simply power down a cell phone, the main operating system turns off, sure. However, the baseband processor, which is the chip that actually communicates with the cell towers, can sometimes remain active or enter a low-power state.
Right.
It can still passively ping control channels to check for signal strength, which leaves a breadcrumb trail for law enforcement. By physically ripping the battery out of the casing, Keyes broke the electrical circuit entirely. It is really the only way to guarantee a device is forensically dead.
So he has a forensically dead phone. He then asks her for her debit card to access funds. She tells him she shares an account with her boyfriend and that the physical ATM card is actually left inside a truck parked at her house.
That's right.
She gives him the PIN and her home address. Keyes then takes Samantha to his own property. He forces her into a small shed in his front yard. He binds her, turns up a radio to a deafening volume to drown out any noise, and tells her he has a police scanner active. He warns her that if she screams and a neighbor calls it in, he will hear the dispatch over the scanner and know immediately.
He is building an inescapable environment of psychological isolation. He wants her to believe that rescue is completely impossible, that even crying out for help will only seal her fate.
It's just horrific.
With Samantha secured in the shed, he drives to her house to retrieve the ATM card. But while he is in her driveway, physically rummaging through the truck, her boyfriend actually comes outside.
Oh my God.
Yeah. He confronts Keyes. The boyfriend actually yells at him, demanding to know what he's doing, and then runs back inside the house to call the police. Keyes manages to flee the scene, driving straight to an ATM just to test if the PN Samantha gave him actually works before the card can be canceled.
And it works. He confirms the PIN. He then returns to his house, to the shed. And this is where the timeline reaches its most horrific point. He sexually assaults her, and then he asphyxiates her. He murders this 18-year-old girl who fought so incredibly hard to survive.
It's devastating.
And the juxtaposition of what he does next is jarring. He leaves her body in the shed, walks a few yards into his own house, and packs a suitcase. Why? Because he has a pre-planned family vacation. He flies out early the very next morning, February 2nd, to take a cruise out of New Orleans.
It is the ultimate display of psychological compartmentalization. He commits a horrific, violent murder, and literally hours later, he is navigating airport security, boarding a commercial flight, and eventually sipping drinks on a leisure cruise.
It's sickening.
Meanwhile, his victim is concealed in a shed just steps from where his own family sleeps. He enjoys his vacation. He doesn't return to Anchorage until February 17th, over 2 weeks later.
And when he returns, the deception he executes is almost beyond belief. He decides it's time to collect the ransom he had demanded. But to do that, he needs proof of life to convince her family she is still alive.
Right.
So he goes out to the shed. He retrieves Samantha's body, which has been preserved by the freezing Alaskan winter temperatures, and he uses cosmetic techniques to pose her body. He literally physically stitches her eyelids open to make it appear as though she is awake and alert.
It's truly macabre.
Yeah.
He takes a Polaroid photograph of her tied up. And to establish a credible timeline for the authorities, to prove she is alive now, he places a copy of the Anchorage Daily News from February 13th right in the frame of the photo.
Wow.
He then takes that Polaroid, makes a photocopy of it to avoid giving them the original chemical print, and types out a demand for $30,000 on the back. But he doesn't use a computer. He uses a manual typewriter that he specifically purchased for this one task.
Wait, why a manual typewriter? Is that just an aesthetic choice, or is there a mechanical reason behind it?
It is entirely mechanical and forensically preventative. Since the 1990s, nearly all modern color printers use something called machine identification code, or printer steganography.
The yellow microdots, right?
Exactly. They print tiny, almost invisible yellow dots on every single page that encode the printer's serial number and the exact date and time the document was printed. Law enforcement can decode those dots and trace a document back to the specific store where the printer was purchased or the IP address it was connected to.
That's fascinating.
Keyes knew this. A purely mechanical typewriter leaves absolutely no digital footprint, no microdots, and cannot be traced unless the authorities find the exact physical machine to match the striker imperfections.
So he then takes this untraceable ransom note and hides it in Connor's Bog Park, placing it underneath a missing dog flyer for a dog named Albert. Then he puts the battery back into Samantha's phone just long enough for the device to power cycle and send one text to her boyfriend telling him that the note is under Albert at the park before immediately ripping the battery out again.
Right.
The police rush to the park and recover the note. Meanwhile, Keyes dismembers her body, drives out to Matanuska Lake, cuts a hole in the thick ice, and submerges her remains in the freezing depths.
The sequence of events we just walked through, the coffee stand, the shed, the cruise, the Polaroid, the typewriter, it is overwhelming in its callousness and its logistical density.
But it brings up a glaring contradiction. I mean, if we look at the timeline, he operated as a complete ghost for a decade. Why the sudden shift?
That's the big question.
Right. To target a girl at a coffee stand down the street from his home. To keep her in a shed in his own yard. To risk confronting her boyfriend in a driveway. Was this sheer arrogance? Did he genuinely think he was untouchable? Or was he losing control of his compulsions? Like an addict who can no longer bear the friction of waiting for their next fix.
That is the central debate among criminal behaviorists regarding Keyes. The consensus is that it was a toxic collision of both factors. Yeah, when an offender successfully evades capture for that long, defeating federal systems time and time again, there is a massive inflation of the ego. They begin to really believe that their intellect is vastly superior to the collective intelligence of law enforcement.
The arrogance.
Right. But beneath that arrogance is the reality of psychological decompensation. The elaborate logistics required to travel thousands of miles to kill someone take a massive toll. The booking, the cash routing, the planning, it's exhausting.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Eventually, the baseline urge to kill outpaces the patience required to plan it properly. He wanted the thrill, and he simply didn't want to wait for his next cross-country trip to get it. He hunted in his own backyard because his compulsion demanded immediate, frictionless satisfaction.
So, if the Samantha Koenig case was a massive deviation, an outright breakdown of his system, we really need to understand how he operated before 2012. How did a guy commit murders across the United States for years without ever once popping up on law enforcement's radar?
He achieved that invisibility by functioning as what profilers call a logistical predator.
A logistical predator.
Yeah. Most serial offenders, even highly intelligent ones, have a geographic comfort zone. They hunt where they live or where they work or along routes they frequently commute. They operate within a localized sphere of familiarity. Keyes completely inverted that psychological model. His entire modus operandi was specifically designed to sever any geographic connection between himself and his victims.
Well, let's look at the mechanics of how he pulled that off. He wouldn't just drive to the next town over. He would purchase an airline ticket to a random city where he had absolutely no family, no friends, no business ties whatsoever.
Right.
He would fly into that city, rent a car, and then drive sometimes up to 1,000 miles away from the airport just to locate a victim.
And his operational security during these cross-country trips was completely obsessive. He paid for everything exclusively in cash, gas, food, motels, toll booths. He left zero credit card trails.
Wait, let me pause you there. Booking a flight and renting a car exclusively with cash in the post-9/11 era, that is incredibly difficult. Most rental agencies flat out refuse cash deposits without a major credit card on file for liability reasons. How was he bypassing those financial tripwires?
That is a crucial point. It wasn't easy, which is why it required such intense discipline. He would often use prepaid debit cards purchased with cash to secure the initial reservation, effectively masking his true banking identity from the corporate databases.
Oh, wow.
For flights, he would sometimes book through secondary travel agencies rather than directly with the airlines, adding another layer of obfuscation. And when he drove these massive distances, he avoided toll roads that utilized early Easy Pass camera systems, sticking to rural state routes where he could hand physical cash to a toll attendant.
It's like money laundering.
Exactly. He layered degrees of separation between his identity and his physical location, much like how a shell company launders money by breaking the chain of custody.
But the most terrifying aspect of his methodology, the thing that makes my blood run cold just thinking about the sheer foresight involved, is the concept of the kill kits. This wasn't just him bringing a duffel bag of weapons on a plane, which obviously wouldn't make it past the TSA. He prepared for these murders years in advance.
Precisely. The level of premeditation is staggering. Years before he would ever commit a crime in a specific geographic region, he would travel there and bury a cache of supplies. He typically utilized large, durable, plastic Home Depot buckets.
Just ordinary buckets.
Yeah, standard buckets. Inside them, he would meticulously pack handguns, ammunition, suppressors, heavy-duty zip ties, duct tape, and multiple bottles of Drano.
Let's explain the Drano.
Yeah.
Because that's not something you typically find in a standard forensic profile.
No, it's not. Drano is heavily composed of sodium hydroxide, or lye. It is a highly caustic chemical designed to dissolve organic matter like hair and grease in plumbing. Keyes understood the basic chemistry of decomposition.
Okay.
By pouring concentrated sodium hydroxide over a body, he could rapidly accelerate the breakdown of soft tissue, severely compromising any DNA evidence or time of death indicators before he buried the remains.
That is grim.
He would seal these buckets tightly, sometimes using silicone caulk to protect the contents from moisture and the elements, and bury them in remote, wooded areas across the United States. He would record the exact GPS coordinates, leave the area, and fly back to his normal life in Alaska.
Oh, he just leaves it there.
Yeah, sometimes 2, 3, or even 5 years would pass without him returning to that spot. Then, when the compulsion struck, he would fly into the region, rent a car, navigate to the GPS coordinates, dig up the bucket, and he was instantly fully armed and ready to strike.
Just like a twisted, lethal version of geocaching. You know, where people use GPS coordinates to find hidden trinkets in the woods. Except he was burying the tools of a nightmare. And the fact that he could just bury a bucket, fly home, and sit down to make pancakes for his daughter the next morning, the compartmentalization is deeply disturbing. And it meant that when he traveled, if he was randomly stopped at the airport or pulled over for a broken taillight by a state trooper, his trunk was completely empty. He had no weapons on him. His lack of a signature was his signature.
And that deliberate lack of a signature extended directly to his victim selection as well. Traditional criminal profiling relies heavily on victimology finding the common thread between the people targeted.
Right.
Like, are they all blonde college students? Are they all sex workers operating in a specific district? Are they all elderly people living alone? Keyes had absolutely no victim profile. He targeted men, women, couples, the young, the old. His selection was based entirely on whoever happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time when he had dug up one of his kits and was ready to act.
Let's examine some of the examples from our sources to see how this varied. In June 2011, there was the devastating case of Bill and Lorraine Currier in Essex, Vermont. Keyes flew into Chicago, rented a car, and drove hundreds of miles across the country to Vermont.
Just a hunt.
Just a hunt. He dug up a kill kit he had buried near a reservoir years prior. He then just drove through a random, quiet, suburban neighborhood looking for a house with no dog and no visible security system. He physically cut the phone lines to the house, broke in, and abducted the couple from their own bed.
He transported them to an abandoned farmhouse he had scoped out previously, He shot Bill Courier and he strangled Lorraine. He then left their bodies in the basement of that abandoned structure, disposed of his weapons, and drove all the way back to Chicago to fly home.
Unbelievable.
He later confessed to this specific crime, but by the time he gave federal investigators the location of the farmhouse, the property had already been completely demolished by developers and the debris disposed of in a local municipal landfill. Their bodies have never been recovered.
And then there are cases where the connections are based almost entirely on his meticulous travel logs rather than a direct confession. Like the disappearance of Deborah Feldman in New Jersey in 2009. She is a suspected victim because her vanishing aligns perfectly with a gap in Keyes' rental car mileage and an admission he made about committing a murder in the Northeast during that specific window of time.
And just as he buried his victims, his physical methods of killing varied wildly too. In Washington state, he confessed to multiple murders, telling the FBI that he primarily strangled his victims.
Okay.
However, he noted one specific exception, a male victim who fought back so fiercely that Keyes ended up striking him in the head, killing him via blunt force trauma during the struggle. Strangling, shooting, blunt force trauma, he adapted to whatever the immediate situation required.
Which makes profiling impossible.
Exactly. This fluidity destroys any attempt by forensic analysts to link his crimes through a consistent physical pathology.
So he has this flawlessly engineered system. He's operating completely in the blind spots of American law enforcement. But it all comes crashing down because of the Samantha Koenig case. His invisible empire falls, not because of brilliant forensic profiling or a massive task force connecting the dots, but because of a simple ATM card.
It was a classic fatal misstep born of greed and a rapidly deteriorating sense of security. Samantha's father, James Koenig, working in tandem with the police, made an incredibly strategic, calculated move.
He deposited the reward money.
Yes, he took reward money that had been generously donated by the Anchorage community and deposited it directly into the bank account connected to the stolen ATM card Keyes possessed.
They baited the hook. And Keyes, the man who had been obsessively careful about only using cash for a decade to avoid digital footprints, took the bait. He started making withdrawals from that account.
The moment that card was used, the FBI and the Texas Rangers initiated a massive, coordinated digital dragnet. We have to understand how the banking network communicates with law enforcement in these scenarios.
Right, the pings.
When a flagged card is inserted into an ATM, the transaction data is routed through a central processing hub. The FBI had a wiretap equivalent set up on that specific account number. The moment a transaction was requested, the banking server pinged the FBI command center with the exact location of the terminal. They began tracking his movements in near real time. First, there was a ping in Anchorage. Then, as Keyes began driving south to escape, the pings moved to Arizona, then New Mexico, and finally into Texas.
The tension of that manhunt must have been electric. Just watching a digital dot move across a map of the American Southwest, knowing this guy is a lethal threat to anyone he encounters at a gas station or a rest stop. Authorities were able to pull security surveillance footage from the various ATMs he used and determine that the suspect was driving a white Ford Focus.
Finally, the digital trail caught up with physical reality. In Lufkin, Texas, a corporal named Brian Henry with the Texas Highway Patrol spotted a white Ford Focus matching the description.
That's the moment.
He initiated a traffic stop. Keyes was behind the wheel. Corporal Henry, along with Texas Ranger Steve Rayburn, handled the interaction with textbook precision. They obtained enough probable cause during the stop to execute a lawful search of the vehicle.
And what did they find?
Inside that rented Ford Focus, hidden away, they found the two pieces of physical evidence that shattered Keyes' invisible world forever, Samantha Koenig's cellular phone and the ATM card right there in his wallet.
A routine traffic stop on a Texas highway ends the reign of a master predator. He's arrested, and this transitions us into the interrogation phase of our sources. And if you think his crimes were chilling, the way he behaved in the interrogation room is a masterclass in psychological warfare.
It really is.
The FBI has released over 6 hours of video from these interviews, and watching them is deeply unsettling.
When you analyze those tapes, what becomes immediately apparent is that Keyes never relinquished his internal sense of control. Even sitting in a sterile interview room, wearing a standard-issue inmate uniform, facing the full weight of the federal government, he treated the entire process like a high-stakes corporate negotiation.
Like a business meeting.
Yeah. FBI Special Agent Julene Godin and Assistant U.S. Attorneys Kevin Feldis and Frank Russo conducted the primary interviews, and they consistently noted how frustrating the dynamic was. Keyes actively enjoyed the cat-and-mouse game.
He would sit there, casually sipping coffee, sometimes chuckling at their questions. Agent Godin noted in her reports that she never once got the sense that he accidentally let something slip or that they pressured him enough to get angry and blurt something out. Every single syllable he offered was measured.
He was entirely in control.
He knew exactly what data he was giving them, and he always demanded something in return for it.
And what he demanded was highly specific and deeply revealing about his psyche. He wanted an ironclad guarantee of a quick route to the federal death penalty, and he absolutely wanted to avoid being put on trial in multiple different state jurisdictions. He did not want a media circus.
And his reasoning for avoiding the media is one of the most bizarre, jarring contradictions in this entire examination. This is a man who tortured and murdered innocent people without a second thought, treating them as disposable objects. Yet he was fiercely, almost violently protective of his own family's perception of him.
Right.
He explicitly withheld details about his crimes to keep the specifics out of the press, specifically stating that he didn't want his young daughter to be able to search his name on the internet and read about the horrific things he did. He also mentioned that he didn't want the shock of the news to cause his mother to have a heart attack.
It is a striking textbook example of a psychopath's ability to compartmentalize empathy. He could completely dehumanize his victims, turning off his conscience like a light switch, while simultaneously maintaining a highly guarded, protective emotional attachment to his own blood relatives.
It's wild.
He used that familial attachment as leverage against the FBI, threatening to shut down the interviews completely if any details leaked to the press before he was executed.
Despite the stalling tactics, the FBI did manage to extract some partial confessions. He admitted to killing 4 people in Washington state, plus one person he killed in Nika Bay shortly after getting out of the Army in 2001. So that's 5 victims just in Washington alone.
That we know of.
Right. But the details he provided were like twisted, sadistic riddles. For instance, he openly taunted the investigators about a specific geographic location. He leaned forward in his chair, looked at the agents, and said, "You guys know about Lake Crescent in Washington, right?"
And when prosecutor Kevin Feldis asked if that was the lake where he disposed of a body, Keyes just smirked and replied, "That's one of the lakes."
Oh.
He then went on to casually describe the mechanics of how he submerged the victim. He didn't put them in a container or a barrel. Instead, he indicated that he used 4 to 5 milk jugs, presumably filled with sand or gravel, to weigh the body down. Agent Godin pressed him on this, asking if the body would still be intact if they found it at the bottom of the lake, and he just cut her off with a flat, definitive no.
But let's talk about the mechanics of that. Why milk jugs filled with sand instead of just tying the body to a heavy rock?
It comes down to water displacement and precise control over buoyancy. A rock is heavy, but it is bulky and difficult to tie securely to a body without the rope slipping off during descent.
That makes sense.
Milk jugs have built-in reinforced handles that make them incredibly easy to thread ropes through. By filling them with wet sand or gravel, he could create dense, compact, easily transportable weights that would drag a body down quickly and cleanly without drawing attention on the shoreline.
During these interviews, he also became bizarrely fixated on a specific weapon. In a November 29th interview, just days before the end, he asked if investigators had found any knives during their search of a property he owned in New York or on a boat he kept in Washington.
Right, the Tantu knife.
Yeah. The one he really cared about, the one he kept asking about, was a 4.5-inch cold steel Tanto folding knife that he had bought in Port Angeles, Washington.
When the prosecution asked why that specific folding knife was so important to him, Keyes hinted at the forensic reality of the weapon. He told them that if they found it and took the folding mechanism apart, they might find something hidden inside.
Blood.
Exactly. He was heavily implying that the blood of a victim had seeped into the complex hinge mechanism of the blade, coagulated, and remained trapped there. When they asked directly if that knife was associated with one of the Washington killings, he simply replied, "Yeah."
It's just a relentless manipulation tactic, leaving breadcrumbs that lead into a dark forest with no exit. "You'll get the whole story eventually," he told them, chuckling. But they didn't. Because on December 2, 2012, Keyes made absolutely sure no one would ever get the whole story.
He did.
He died by suicide in his Anchorage jail cell.
His suicide completely blindsided the investigative team. He had seemed so engaged in the negotiation process, so invested in controlling the narrative and securing his specific demands. But ultimately, when he realized he was losing leverage, when he realized the federal wheels of justice moved slowly and he wasn't going to get his fast-track execution, he took the final control mechanism available to him. He took his own life, silencing the only person who knew the full truth.
And he didn't leave quietly. Beneath his body in the cell, investigators found a yellow legal pad. It was covered in his blood, and written on it in a mix of pencil and ink was a rambling poem, an illegible ode to murder.
A terrible poem.
Yeah. But at the very bottom of the page, there were sketches. He had drawn exactly 11 skulls.
The FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, processed that document extensively. They looked for microwriting. They analyzed the indentations on the paper. They checked for invisible ink.
And did they find anything?
They concluded there was no hidden code, no cipher, and no actionable investigative leads contained within the text of the poem. It was just a final, morbid sign-off. But those 11 skulls have haunted investigators and the true crime community ever since.
Hold on, I need to jump in here. We're taking the 11 skulls as gospel, treating it like a definitive body count. But everything we've just walked through about this guy screams narcissism, control, and manipulation. Isn't it just as likely he drew an arbitrary number of skulls to send the FBI on a permanent, unsolvable wild goose chase?
It's definitely possible.
Right. Serial killers are notorious for inflating their numbers to secure a legacy. Look at Henry Lee Lucas.
It is a highly valid point, and it's something profilers wrestle with constantly. It is incredibly difficult to say with absolute certainty. On one hand, Keyes was an intensely pragmatic, literal thinker. When he gave a detail, it usually checked out forensically, as seen with the Courier case and the exact locations of his buried caches.
That's true.
If he drew 11 skulls, it's highly plausible that represents his actual literal body count. On the other hand, as you pointed out, he was a supreme narcissist who actively reveled in outsmarting the system, drawing a few extra skulls to guarantee he remained a terrifying, larger-than-life mystery. Forcing the FBI to waste millions of dollars searching for ghosts is exactly the kind of psychological parting shot he would deeply enjoy.
The puzzle is missing half its pieces, and the guy holding the box threw it in the fire.
Right.
How do we even begin to make sense of this? The FBI has essentially admitted that traditional investigative methods are useless here.
That is the most frustrating, enduring legacy of Israel Keyes. Criminal profiling and tracking systems in the United States, like VICAP, the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, are fundamentally based on identifying patterns.
Right, like looking for similarities.
They look for a localized hunting ground, a consistent victimology, or a specific weapon signature to link disparate crimes together. Because Keyes engineered his crimes to be entirely devoid of all three, trying to connect missing persons' cases to him is an exercise in futility.
It's impossible.
If someone goes missing in rural New Jersey, local police don't naturally assume an Alaskan construction worker flew to Chicago, drove 800 miles in a rental car, abducted them, and flew home the next day. The data points are too far apart for the algorithm to connect them.
It is a logistical nightmare.
Yeah.
But that hasn't stopped the effort to trace his footsteps. In fact, looking at the updates from 2025 and 2026, there are massive, ongoing civilian and law enforcement pushes to reverse engineer his travel logs.
Yes, the open source community is doing amazing work here.
Independent researchers have really taken up the mantle. There's an exhaustive investigation by a researcher named Josh Hallmark, who hosts a show called True Crime Bullsh. He has spent years painstakingly analyzing Keyes' bank records, every mile driven in a rental car, and every flight log, trying to identify windows of time where Keyes was completely unaccounted for, and then cross-referencing those exact windows against national missing persons databases.
That kind of crowdsourced, open source intelligence gathering is proving vital. It is essentially using big data to rebuild the invisible map Keyes tried to burn, and it has led to tangible, physical searches.
Like what?
Well, in 2025, there were renewed high-tech sonar searches conducted at Lake Crescent in Washington, the very Lake Keys taunted the FBI about. They used side-scan sonar technology, which bounces acoustic waves off the lake bed to create detailed topographical images.
Did they find the milk jugs?
The sonar did detect distinct anomalies on the lake bed that resemble human remains. But Lake Crescent is incredibly challenging. It's a glacially carved lake that plunges over 600 feet down in some areas. At that depth, the water pressure is crushing, the darkness is absolute, and the accumulated silt can bury objects quickly.
So they can't just dive down and check.
No, furthermore, the water is so cold that it inhibits the bacterial growth necessary for a body to bloat and float to the surface. Recovery operations in those conditions are incredibly dangerous and complex.
And the developments just keep coming. In early 2026, credible rumors began circulating that a hiker near Tupper Lake in the Adirondacks of upstate New York stumbled across what looks suspiciously like one of Key's kill kits.
A new bucket.
Yeah, a buried cache in a remote, wooded area containing familiar materials. Now, the FBI hasn't officially confirmed if the contents match his exact forensic signature, but given that he owned property in New York and traveled through the Northeast extensively, the possibility is terrifyingly real. It means his traps are still out there, buried in the dirt, waiting to be found.
And that physical reality perfectly mirrors the psychological reality left behind by Keyes. When we talk about the victims, we rightly talk about Samantha Koenig, Bill and Lorraine Currier, and suspected victims like Deborah Feldman. But we also have to acknowledge the unnamed 8, the skulls on that bloody legal pad that don't have a name attached to them.
It is a crushing, suffocating burden for the families of missing persons across the country.
It truly is the ultimate cruelty. When a loved one vanishes without a trace, the human brain searches desperately for an explanation, no matter how grim. The existence of a predator like Israel Keyes, someone who traveled the country plucking random people out of their lives without any rhyme, reason, or connection, injects a paralyzing variable into every cold case from 2001 to 2012.
Because he could have been anywhere.
Exactly. Families who have spent years looking for a local suspect or clinging to the hope that their loved ones simply ran away to start a new life now have to live with the agonizing question. Did they cross paths with Israel Keyes? That lack of resolution, that ambiguous loss, is a unique, enduring kind of psychological torture.
It's an infection of doubt that he unleashed on the world, and even in death, he's still controlling the narrative. He designed a life and a death that ensures we will never have all the answers. He weaponized the vastness of the American landscape against us.
He weaponized the landscape, and he weaponized the anonymity of modern travel. He fed a compulsion that had no geographic, demographic, or logistical boundaries, exploiting the very systems we rely on for convenience.
Which brings us back to where we started today, the mask of sanity. The idea that extraordinary darkness doesn't always look like a monster lurking in an alleyway. Sometimes it looks like a veteran, a contractor, a father of a young daughter. It looks like the guy renting a car at the airport counter, paying in cash, and driving off into the night. It is the terrifying realization that evil can perfectly masquerade behind an ordinary suburban existence.
It raises a vital, deeply unsettling question for all of you living in this hyper-connected era. We think we are constantly monitored by our devices, our credit cards, our digital footprints. We take comfort in the idea that someone can't just disappear.
Right, but they can.
But Keyes proved that if you are disciplined enough, those massive tracking systems can be completely bypassed. So if Keyes successfully exploited the blind spots in our highly tracked modern society by simply paying in cash and pulling a battery out of a phone, how many others might be doing the exact same thing right now, hiding in plain sight within the statistical noise?
A young girl walks into a storm in the middle of the night, and decades later, new theories and renewed attention continue to surround her disappearance. Next time, we revisit the case of Asha Degree,